Recording now. Okay, so this is a phenomenal week right now because we had Shabbos, and then Monday, Tuesday, today's Rosh Chodesh, so Monday, Tuesday, Rosh Chodesh, Wednesday, Yom HaZikaron, Thursday, Yom HaShoah. Now, it doesn't usually fall out.
That's my oat.
What? I'm sorry?
That's my oat, not Shoah.
Did I say Yom HaShoah? Okay, Yom HaZikaron. Right, Yom HaZikaron, Yom HaAtzmaut, and the same thing with Yom HaShoah last week. Yom HaShoah was observed last week, but really because it fell on Shabbos, because the way the calendar is, that it falls on Shabbos, so it can't be observed on Shabbos, so it's pushed off to a Thursday. They wouldn't do it on a Friday. So when a Yom HaAtzmaut, and we've discussed this in the past, that Yom HaAtzmaut can only be observed on certain days of the week. The Rabbanut decided a few years ago. And the real reason for that is because of Yom HaZikaron. Yom HaZikaron is a big day in Israel for obvious reasons. And people will travel the country to go visit their loved ones in sometimes more than one cemetery, unfortunately, because as they say in the pasuk says, "Ein bayis asher ein sham meis." Everybody has some connection to someone that fell in battle or in a terrorist attack. So people will flock to the cemeteries and for various services. And let's say if Yom HaZikaron would fall on a Sunday, the Rabbanut didn't want to observe it on Sunday because then people would be driving on Shabbat to go to the various places to get there a day before. So therefore they push it off. So if it falls on a Sunday, it's a Monday, which means Yom HaTzmaut is on a Tuesday. It's a new holiday. So actually this Shabbos, I'm going to discuss, I think Rav Rimon put out a very interesting tshuva about what to do. Like, I understand it's pushed off, but let's say, should we say Hallel if you say Hallel, do we say Hallel on Shabbos this week, or do we say it on the day that it's observed? And it certainly has a question, what about us in the diaspora? Like, we don't have the problem, but like, it seems kind of weird. Like, should we observe it? Does it go by the date, or does it go by the when Israel's observing it? So lots of interesting questions. So it's quite a week, though, that we have 4 days in a row of observance, 3 out of the 4 reciting Hallel, and it's something really, really interesting. So I'm not sure if I ever looked at this before, but I was re-examining, and I think it's something worthwhile to go back. If you want to discuss Tazria Metzora, by all means, if you want to talk about tsaras and leprosy and white spots and black hairs and this kind of stuff, by all means, but do that on your own time, because I want to discuss Yom HaAtzmaut. I want to discuss Israel, and maybe we could get to go back soon. Maybe. My daughter, Baruch Hashem, I think she's on here. She got a ticket, and I think she got Shiur. So that's it's a step in the right direction, but I'll believe it when I see it. And now, as a first degree relative, we might be able to have the opportunity and the ability to visit. I'm hoping that the teen travel will happen to Israel this summer as well. Crossing our fingers for that. My daughter's going on Sulam. I hope. And I know that for Miriam and her Israel trips, I hope that they go. So lots of great things happening. So I'm going to share screen here, and I want to show you something really fascinating. Okay, you can see it. Do you see it on the screen? Okay, let me see if I can blow it up a little bit. Oh, look at that. Okay, so this here is the Declaration of Independence for the State of Israel. Okay, now there was a lot of discussion. I mean, you could just imagine that when the state is being founded, and like Jews have to get together and like write a document, and they have to figure out, like what's it going to say. So already then, of course, the question comes up of, and this is still an issue today in Israel, is that there's really no separation of church and state. Now, you might argue that there shouldn't be a separation of church and state. Obviously, it's a huge complication. It's a sticking point in I don't know, basically like everything that happens in Israel, whether it's the army, whether it's the government. I mean, the whole 4 elections that we have right now, and a big part of why that keeps happening is because of the power of the religious blocs that they have, and the way the whole system needs to be redone. But we'll leave that for the think tanks and the pundits or whatever. But just imagine, new state of Israel is formed. They're sitting in, the famous picture of behind with the picture of Herzl in the background. If you go to Tel Aviv Independence Hall, if you haven't been there, it's really amazing to see. But just to see, by the way, what's going on outside of Independence Hall. If you go on Rothschild Boulevard in Tel Aviv, go like on a Thursday night. Independence Hall won't be open, but if you go to Independence Hall in the afternoon and then go back on Thursday night, I mean, it's like the vibrancy of Tel Aviv in that spot is just absolutely phenomenal. I wonder if the founders of Israel knew what they were getting into. So the first line, or one of the first lines there, it says, "Mitoch bitachon tzur Yisrael hinenu chotmim b'chatimat yadeinu le'edut al hachraza zu." So I'm reading an Israeli document. I have to read it as best I can with Havarat Sfaradit, which does not come natural to me, even though I was educated in modern Orthodox high schools and day schools. I still can't do it. So amidst the bitachon means two things. Bitachon is security, but bitachon is also, we say, or maybe more accurately, bitachon. Bitachon amidst the trust. You see, there's the translation here. Trust in the Rock of Israel. We affix our signatures to the proclamation at this session, the Provisional Council of the State, right? B'mochshav moatzah medina hazmanit al admat hamoledet be'ir Tel Aviv hayom hazeh erev Shabbat Hey Iyar Tavshin Chet 14 b'Mai 1948. I mean, such a historical. We know the pictures of the signing, and if you look, first of all, look at the signatures on here. Okay, so look, the first one here, if you can see my mouse here, of course, this is David Dalid Ben Gurion. Okay, and people have analyzed and looked at the signatures, and people who are handwriting analysts and things like that, you can always just kind of see, who signs big and who signs fancy and who signs small and this and that. Okay, now the question came up when it came to write the Declaration of Independence, whether or not they should include God's name. Okay, now you think, like, what's the big deal, right? I mean, so if you look here, this might sound familiar. In Congress, July 4th, 1776, the unanimous declaration of the 13 United States of America, when in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitle them, a decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation. So the Declaration of Independence is very much about God. I pledge allegiance, right, under God, we say. I would venture a guess that if they had to write the Declaration of Independence today, probably not so much God, would probably offend somebody and would probably, cancel somebody. I don't know. That's a modern conversation. But in the state of Israel, the question came up about how to write God. So they came up, and I'm going to tell you an interesting chap at the end, but they came up with this notion of Tzur Yisrael. Now, Tzur Yisrael appears, quite a few times. The word Tzur is like for God. So here's the Gemara. This is the Gemara in Brachos here on Daf Zayin. It says, Bo re'eh shelo k'midas HaKadosh Baruch Hu midas basar v'dam. That God is not like, a normal, like human. Midas basar v'dam, Sar tzur al gabi hakosel, ve'enu yachal lahatal ba, ruach haneshama, krevim b'nei ma'ayim. He says, a human king can't create something. You could write something on, or a human being can write something on, on a piece of paper, and that doesn't have a life. He says, "V'kadosh Baruch Hu einu kain tzar tzur b'toch tzur matayil baruch neshama krevim b'nei ma'ayim v'hainu damarchan ein kadosh k'Hashem k'yim b'techa ve'ein tzur kelokeinu. My ain't tzur kelokeinu, ain't sayar kelokeinu." So what is the word tzur? Normally we say tzur, like we say ma'os tzur, or tzur Yisrael, rock of Israel. But he says God, the Gemara says, is, and quoting the prayer of Chana, is that when she says there's no sanctified like God, and there's none like him, there ain't tzur, and there's no tzur here from the word sayar, which is an artist or creator or an artisan. There's no tsayar like Israel. Now, I have here, let me just see if I could rotate this page because you think I know how to do this by now. Okay. Sorry, this is just being difficult. If you have the page that I handed out, I'll just, I'll read it to you from Rav Hirsch. And Rav Hirsch says, because we have it in Ha'azinu, Hatsur tamim pa'alo ki chol derachav bishpat, ke'elamuna ve'einav tzadik v'yasharhu. The rock, perfect in his working, for all his ways are of the government of justice, a God of confidence and no misuse of power, righteous and straight is he. So Rav Hirsch writes, he says, and this is brilliant, like figuring out the words of Rav Hirsch. Why would it? Why would? And really explaining that Gemara of why would the Gemara for Chana say tsur as like tsayar? So in Rav Simchel Brody of Kelm, he says that the way that God works in this world is kind of like a picture. He says that when an artist draws a picture, we don't know what it's going to look like until it's finished, right? The more detail that you're doing, that you're working on, you don't see. You ever go to one of those things where the guy like draws the picture upside down, and then all of a sudden at the end, like they turn it over and there's a picture, like you don't know what he's drawing. And then when they turn, oh, look, there it is. He says that's kind of like what the way Hashem works in the world is that we don't understand every little detail of Hashem's work in the world, but only after so much time or so much retrospection are we able to see, and that's what we call hashgacha pratis. Okay, so if you read what Rav Hirsch says, and he says there's 2 points here. He says, first of all, it's in the bottom of the right column, if you have it. He says, with these words, the real Shiur begins. The tsur, as the allegorical description of God, appears repeatedly in this poem. The first thought one can say, the fundamental thought of the Kriya Shem Hashem, which begins here, is tsur. According to some opinions written here with a large tzadi, according to the way of our sages taken in Sifri, there are 2 thoughts in tsur. One is hatzakif, is the strong one, and the tsayar is the former or the creator. Now in the second column. If the word sur, taken in the ordinary meaning of rock, presents a natural picture of strength, firmness, unalterable and unconquerable, and so expresses the strongest and most dependable mainstay and protection, then the meaning of the root sur, used as a verb, would already be 2 activities of the strength represented by the noun sur. As a verb, sur mostly has the meaning of besieging, enclosing, strength shown in putting a strong barrier around, firmly fencing in. Kitatsur el ir. Matzor is a besieged city. So Rav Hirsch's point is that first of all, that there is tsur is from like the word rock, that we have to have a rock solid, a commitment, just like we have our commitment to God. So too, when they were creating the state of Israel, they referred to this as, this is our kind of like our eternal, this is our homeland, and we have to have a rock solid commitment to that. And also that just as, and Rav Hirsch points out that a rock doesn't change, a rock always stays the same, so too our commitment to God, no matter where we are, should always be steadfast, and we should always maintain that carefully. So look, if you try to understand where the Jewish people were in Israel in 1948, and they knew what was coming as soon as they would sign that document. And as soon as they got recognition, they knew that war was coming, and they didn't know if they would live to the next day. But yet they went ahead and they established that, and they used the term of Tzur Yisrael. Now, Tzur Yisrael, which is, we don't know what's going to happen. We don't know how this experiment is going to turn out. And now look at us 73 years later. I've always, think of the first time that you went to Israel, okay? And think of it now. Look, many of us have been blessed to go more than one time. I remember my very first time, and I'm so jealous of my own kids who got to go as little kids, and they have such a deep love of Israel and the state of Israel and the people of Israel. And we've yearned to go back, and now I'm at a point like, oh my God, this is the longest that I haven't been in Israel in like a long time. But I didn't get to go until I went for the year when I was 18 years old. And I mean, I've probably said the story, but I'll tell it to you again. I remember thinking like I didn't know what to expect. I honestly had no idea. I didn't know what to, there was no internet. When you wanted to call your parents, you had to like reserve a spot where they can call you on the Asimon, you would call them, collect, and they would call you back, or however that worked. And my father would send me clippings from the newspaper of the box scores from the sports pages, which by the time I got it was like 2 weeks old. So our kids today have like instant information. They can watch the games live, let alone not get a box score from 3 weeks ago. So I remember my first time there, and my yeshiva was located outside of Yerushalayim. And then we got there, and then I remember we schlepped our stuff, and it's a lot of stuff, and we get there, and I'm like thinking like, wait, I'm supposed to live in this place for a year? Are you joking? I didn't see it before. Nobody took me on a tour beforehand on Thanksgiving weekend to go check out the schools. And nobody took me to a restaurant and said, hey, why don't you go here? And nobody courted me. I just blindly went. And I get there and they're like, okay, dump your stuff. We're getting a bus. We're going to the hotel. And we're going to go. And I'm expecting this huge religious experience. I'm going to be moved. I'm going to be, crying. I'm going to kiss the ground. And every time we saw a wall on the bus, I go, is that the kotel? Is that the kotel? Is that the kotel? I felt like that little bird. Are you my mother? Are you my mother? Are you my mother? That's what I felt like. And then we get to the kotel. And by the way, the kotel, in 1989 did not look like it looks now. The amount of development and niceties, it was a little plainer then. And I went, and I'm sounding like I'm so old, but there's a big difference between 1989 and 2021. A big difference. You could drive on Rehov Yafo, right? The buses went on Rehov. There was no train. There was no, we took buses, and I remember getting there, and I'm like, it's a wall. Nothing. I felt like nothing. Absolutely nothing. I know it sounds sacrilegious, but it took me a while to develop a feeling for the state of Israel. But over time. And again, I had nobody guiding me. I had no preconceived notions. I had no sort of tradition from my parents. My parents' first time in Israel was to come visit me. So I actually got there before them. And, so over time though, and I wonder, like, you wonder if in 1948, and we could say the same thing about 1967 in Jerusalem, but if in 1948, if they caught a glimpse of what was going on in Israel now, forget about the problems, forget about the struggles, forget about the issues. Just look at the buildings. Just look at how many people are there. Look at the population numbers. Look at the success that we've had in the larger world. I mean, I wonder if in their wildest dreams, they ever thought that something like that could happen. I just wonder. I don't know. And I would sincerely doubt if anybody would be that much of a dream. Because that's really something. So when we look at Sur Yisrael, so if I go back to the, to the document. Here it is in Sur Yisrael. Mitoch bitachon Sur Yisrael. We have faith in the rock of Israel. And that's what they came up, because you realize you had secular, you had non-religious, you had very religious, and they wanted to put God's name, but they figured sort of even then realizing that, okay, it's going to be a difficulty. And by the way, the whole religion and state is a big issue. Right now, Israel does not have a constitution, still does not have a constitution, which is a big complication. We have a Declaration of Independence, but you don't have a constitution. So they decided that they would not put God's name, but as sort of a compromise, they would use the name of Tzur Yisrael. Okay. But there's always like one guy in the room who's going to be smarter than everybody else. Okay. So one of the religious rabbis who I don't remember what how he got involved in this, Rabbi Yehuda Leib Fishman, they went by the name Maimon. He was a signator on the Declaration of Independence. So if you look in the second column, okay, I'm going to blow this up for you as much as I can. Okay. Look over here. You see it enlarged? Thumbs up, enlarged? So right here, it's Yehuda Leib HaKohen Fishman, or went Maimon. But look right here what he writes. Beis Ayin Zayin Hey, which is an acronym for Be'ezras Hashem. He's like, I'll show you. You don't want to put God's name in? I'll put God's name in. So forever and ever in the Declaration of Independence of the State of Israel, God's name does appear. So it's a trick question. Somebody say, oh, does God's name appear? Yeah, actually kind of does. It's like, does Moshe's name appear in the Haggadah? No, it doesn't. Yeah, actually it does one time. So just to show, it's very clever, and it's a little bit of sort of historical tidbit and trivia that you have, and you could see if you ever wanted to kind of study the names. There's been a lot that's written upon it, but I wanted to start with this. It's a very interesting question, because what happens in the state of Israel when it comes to God? But even already from day one, there was a struggle about what to do with God in the state of Israel. There is still very much today a struggle about what to do with God in the state of Israel. But even, and the ones that I've met, let's say, I have yet to meet a non-observant, I don't like to use the word religious, a non-observant Israeli who doesn't believe in God. Like not so many of those. They're very much into God, and even the way that people speak, Bezrat Hashem, and Chazdei Hashem, and Min Hashamayim Tinuchanu, like all these types of phrases that we have. Even though I may not be observant, it doesn't mean I'm not religious. It doesn't mean that I'm not a believer. And they'll tell you that Israel is founded on miracles and amazing things that have happened and that will happen. And there's no reason in anyone's logic or mind that state should exist today. After everything they've been through and everything they continue to go through, and forget about surviving, but to be 27th in the global economy and all these types of things, and the 11th happiest place in the world to live, and you could take all the stats in the world, and with all the heartache and everything, that we still have this unbelievable state that we can go and hopefully go back and visit, and our kids can go there and serve there and live there and study there. It's the most unbelievable thing. So as my daughter's in IDC, and I think that Herzliya is probably the best Jewish college town in the world. Right? The amount of kids that come from all over the world and are studying in college there, and to the life that they have, it's just unbelievable. I never thought that in 1989, my first time that I would see something like that. And when I go back, and I still I'm still brought back to my first times there. What did it look like, and how did we used to take this bus there, and now there's a new road and there's a new this. Every time there's something new, which is amazing. So now I want to get into a bit of a halachic part of this. So we'll skip the Rav Hirsch part, and then I want to show you this interesting tshuva. This is actually probably, did I do the page out of order? Yeah, let me do this page first. Here we go. This is, you can see this page where it says Tesvav. Okay. This comes from Eliezer Waldenberg. I'm trying to get like a little bit of Yom Ha'atzmaut, Yom Yerushalayim together. Rav Eliezer Waldenberg wrote. He was one of the preeminent poskim in Israel of writing a response literature, over 20 volumes of responsive literature. His name was Rav Eliezer Waldenberg. Not related to the Waldenbergs in our shul, as far as I know, but probably are. And he wrote volumes and volumes of tshuvas. And just to give you an idea of what happened, so this comes from, if you see on the top, it says shut, and then across it says Tzitzalia. Shut stands for shilas and tshuvas, she'elot tshuvot, which means responsive literature. This is the Siman Tetvav, this is the chapter, but it's Tzitz Eliezer, and again, because he was a Kohen, I believe, and the tzitz was the forehead piece that the Kohen Gadol wore that said Kodesh LaHashem, and that Chet Yud stands for Chelek Yud. So this is the 10th volume of Tzitz Eliezer, and it was more than 20. What's notable about the 10th volume is that the second half of the 10th volume, most of it was written in the latter part of 1967. And it's dedicated mostly to questions and answers regarding Yerushalayim. And because just think about it, that up until and it's coming out until Chav Ches Iyar. Today is the first day of Iyar. 20th of Iyar is Yom Yerushalayim. Up until Yom Chav Ches Iyar of 1967, so the Jews did not daven at the Kotel. So now all these questions come up. When I go to the Kotel, do I have to tear Kriya if I saw it from Mount Scopus? What about, do I have to say certain prayers? That Shavuos, that year of 1967, people flooded Jerusalem to go pray at the Kotel for the first time. You can imagine what an emotional experience that was. Well, we take it for granted. We could just go and, no problem. You have a question, Sean?
They actually went before the state, so no, they weren't concerned about halachic things then?
Not in the same way, because they didn't go in mass. So I don't think they had, and again, those people had their traditions of what they did, and that played into many of the answers of what to do. But you'll see here, and this is a very, very practical couple of questions, which if you've ever, just playing it to my Kotel experience, and I'll say something further sacrilegious, is that I don't love davening at the Kotel. I know that sounds terrible, but let me clarify. It's very hard for me to concentrate. First of all, it's very hard for me to concentrate because there's like so much going on, and I probably have a little ADD or something, and I can't concentrate. What was that? Also, it's distracting because I can't be alone because somebody's always bothering me. People you don't see, you see in Israel. That's just the way it goes. You see on the street in Jerusalem. I have a next door neighbor. She lives, the family that lives, the Barelowitzes live 50 feet from our house. Been living here for 3 years. Never met them once. I met Taryn Barelowitz for the first time in the Dan Hotel in Tel Aviv. And I go, we live 50 feet apart from each other and we meet in Tel Aviv for the first time. That's the way the world is. That's what Israel does. So a bigger question that came up, it's really more of a Tisha B'Av question, and this was Rav Goren was very, very emphatic. If you know Rav Goren, Rav Shlomo Goren, who was the chief rabbi of the IDF, and very, very tremendous, larger than life personality. If you're looking for a good Israel book to read, I recommend reading his autobiography. It was translated into English by Magid Books. I could show it to you right now. Hold on. That's the beauty of doing class right in my library. This is the book. Okay, it's called With Might and Strength. And he died in 1994, and it was originally done in Hebrew, but it talks about a lot of his escapades as the chief rabbi and the shtick that he pulled, but in a good way to help Klal Yisrael and Medinat Yisrael. Mrs. Halpern, should live and be well, told me the most fantastic story about Rav Goren. Rav Goren always used to fight with her about, why do you come here? Why do you keep 2 days of Yontif? It's always, and there's another thing that's changed. Okay, I'm sure that when I went to Israel for the year, I was there for a year and a half, it was almost unheard of for an American to keep 1 day of Yontif. Unless I live here, I'm going to stay here for Shalosh Regalim. That paradigm has changed so much where so many more people keep 1 day, even if you're just visiting. Okay, I went to visit for a Yom Tov, I keep 1 day. My kids are there for the year, 1 day. So Rav Goren, so Mrs. Halpern and her late husband, Sam Halpern, when they would go for Yontif, often for Sukkot, they would keep 2 days of Yontif. They had a close relationship with Rav Goren. He told them the story about, and it's in the book, of how he conquered Hebron. When Hebron fell, they just kind of gave up because they knew what was coming. And he got there before the army cavalry. And like the old guy came and gave him the key to Hebron. And he's like, he would say that I conquered Hebron. And Rav Goren, the famous picture of him, of course, with the chauffeur at the Kotel in 1967. So he said to Mrs. Halpern, he said, don't bring your gullus here. Don't bring your diaspora to the holiness of Eretz Yisrael. That's how strongly he felt. Rav Goren also has a story where he wanted to get the paratroopers, the Tzanchanim, that they shouldn't train on Shabbos. Tzanchanim always felt like, they're elite. You know that you ever speak to anybody in the Israeli army, everybody in the Israeli army was in an elite unit. I want to do a movie about a guy in the Israeli army who was just a regular guy. He was like a jobnik, and he was not an elite unit. Everybody said that was an elite, and there's books that saying like, no, that's not really an elite unit. This is an elite unit. That's not, they think they're an elite unit. They're not. This is the most. And you put these guys against each other and they could fight for hours. So Tzanchanim, the paratroopers, with the red boots, they said, we don't take a day off. So he lobbied the head of Tzanchanim, Rav Goren did, that you shouldn't train on Shabbos. If it's not an emergency, it's not wartime, don't train. So the guy made a deal with him and he said, I'll tell you what, if you join Sanchanem, then we won't train on Shabbos. So what did Rav Goren do? He joined Sanchanem. He did a parachute jump. He broke his leg. But that was his dedication. And because they honored the command, they don't train on Shabbos because he did this. So after Tisha B'Av, we say on Tisha B'Av afternoon at Mincha, we have a prayer called Nachem. Nachem is, we say, let us think about the sadness of Jerusalem and her desolate state, and she's left alone and she's destroyed. So a lot of people felt that after 1967, especially this is a couple of months afterwards, the euphoria that swept the country. I wasn't alive then, but from what I've read and heard, the euphoria that stretched, that spanned the country after the miraculous victory of 1967, which then God decided in his infinite wisdom, well, we have to take him down a couple of notches. Let's give him a 73. But in the summer of 67, when they have Yerushalayim back and they have Tisha B'Av and they could do Tisha B'Av at the Kotel, and they felt that, you know what, we should change the bracha. We shouldn't say Hashomema, the city that's still. No, it's back in our hands. As a matter of fact, I mentioned this the other day in shul. In 1967, the following year, the Lubavitcher Rebbe, even though the Lubavitcher Rebbe never went to Israel, but he paskined for his Hasidim, which he later rescinded the psak, because when he saw what was really happening, even though he never went to Israel, but he had a psak for his Hasidim, that if they should stay away on Erev Pesach, they should stay away a certain distance away from Jerusalem, because he felt that it might trigger the obligation to bring the Korban Pesach. That's how strongly he felt. He later realized it, but he rescinded that psak, but just to show you what people were thinking then. So Rav Goren, and he had a major machlokas to Rav Soloveitchik, who only went to Israel one time, by the way, and that was because he ran as the chief rabbi of Tel Aviv, a famous kind of runoff election where, ultimately speaking, Rav Victor Amiel was elected chief rabbi, and Rav Soloveitchik was not chosen, and he always kind of felt slighted, and people think maybe that's why he never went back, but that's for the experts to decide. But Rav Goren felt we should change it. Rav Soloveitchik says, no, until we have like the Beis HaMikdash rebuilt. So, and there's a lot written about it, by the way, about the different versions of Nachem that came out and who authored what. We say the traditional one, but that's there. So look at this tshuvas from Rav Waldenberg. So I'm just giving you a bit of context so you can understand what's taking place. These tshuvas written in the latter half of 1967. Now that we have a kotel, what do we do? So look at this. And he says this is like this. 3 she'elos betfilas mincha umarav al yad hakotel maravi. 3 questions regarding mincha marav if you're davening at the kotel. Okay. So habayim lispal al yad hakotel maravi. B'shos bein harabayim l'tfilas mincha marav. So if you're not Hasidish and you're a regular Ashkenazi Jew like myself, and it's a very simple formula. Mincha should be finished before sunset, and Marav could take place after sunset on a regular day. Forget about Plaga Mincha. If you're davening a Mincha, like what we do now, Mincha tonight is at 7:20. I'll give you the exact time, right? So today is Rosh Chodesh Iyar, Tuesday, the 13th of April. Mincha's at 7:20. And Shkia's at 7:35. Sunset 7:35. We will not start Marav until 7:35. That's how it goes, because we try not to. Now, there's also another time called Seis HaKochavim, which is nightfall. Nightfall tonight was 8:17. What is the status of the time between 7:35 and 8:17 tonight? After sunset, before nightfall. It's what we call Bein Hashmashos, between the suns. It's like the Nishtaher. It's the gray area. What is it, night or is it day? Not so clear. Okay, so what happens? So he says like this: a person comes to daven mincha marav, and it's Bein Harabayim. It's like around Shkia, before nightfall. Ubiyoser ba'arvei Shabbosos, and specifically on Friday. He says, Niskalim b'shlosh she'elos v'hem. He says, look at the 3 questions you have. And we'll see his answer, maybe, but just to get you an idea of what people are dealing with. And this is something that's very practical at Hayom Hazeh, in my opinion. So, Hagomrim lehispalel arvis. So let's say, on a night like tonight, you daven Marav 7:35, you're at the Kotel, Shkia 7:35, you daven. By 7:45, you finish Marav. V'shomer mitzibur acher shemispalam od tfilas mincha, and the minyan next to you is Hasidim, and they daven late, and they're still davening. So you finish Maariv, and they're still davening mincha. What should you do? And you hear them saying kedusha. He says, "Are you obligated?" Or even he says, "Are you allowed to answer kedusha?" So like us or Sfardim, he says they daven at shkia. So in other words, you've already said Maariv. Can you answer a weekday mincha of the day before? That's question number one. Number two, Hashomim Baruchu Mitzibur Shemispalam Arvis Shel Shabbos. The Onim Baruchu Imutalahem Lispal La'achmik on Tfilas Mincha Shel Chol B'Yos Vanias Baruchu Nachshavas Kekabala Shabbos. He says normally if you walk to the Kotel Friday night, and again it's like a balagan. You have to know you have your group where you're going to daven, what you're going to do, how you're going to work that. So you hear a Maariv minyan saying Baruchu, and you didn't yet daven mincha. Can you then daven mincha? Because maybe once you said Baruchu or answer Baruchu, it's as if you've accepted Shabbos. And if you've accepted Shabbos, are you allowed to go back and daven a weekday mincha? He says, he says this is more of an Ashkenazi problem because they hear, but the Sfardim are davening Baruchu, they answer Baruchu, but they haven't yet daven mincha. Or he really means to say it's Hasidim. Look at number 3. Afilu, that stands for Im Tim Tzalomer. Afilu Im Tim Tzalomer Shemutarim Lahem Lehispalagam La'achamikan Mincha. He says, even if you say that they can still daven mincha after saying Baruchu, Adayin Kayem She'ela Im Mutar Lihispalel Hatfila Ba'osa Makom Shetzibur Kvar Kibalem As Shabbos. Can you daven in a place where people have already accepted Shabbos? And he gives the psak from Orach Chaim that the Misha Shal Lihispala Mincha B'Erev Shabbos Ad Shekibla Kol Shabbos Lihispala Mincha Ba'osa Beis HaKnesses. This is a very practical question. And I tell this to people all the time. A lot of people don't know this, is that, you know that well, I'll tell you something in a second. Let me just finish the paragraph and then I'll go back to the screen. He says, V'hashela hazos be'etzem klaliti im ba'im l'shem l'sham la'achar she'tzibar shahayim mikodem l'chein kiblas haShabbos v'om l'kvar b'tilas arvis imutar lama l'yispala yodam tfilas min shechol shechol. In other words, can you have Shabbos and weekday prayers taking place at the same time in the same place? These are the questions of Rav Goren, of the Tzitz Eliezer, which are really interesting. Now, what I was saying is that a lot of people don't realize this, and it's an important halacha, and Elion knows what my biggest pet peeve is in shul. She's not going to say it here publicly, but she knows. But another thing that people don't realize is that, let's say, because Friday is always a short day, and not everybody's me that comes to shul on time. I get that. Okay, I'm like maniacal about it. I'm a mishigan about it. I was davening in a shul in Miami Beach, and I was the first one there every day. And they look at me like, what planet are you from? That's my father. That's just, that's who I am. Okay. If you come late to shul on Friday evening and the tzibur is already up to Kabbalah Shabbos and you did not yet daven mincha, the halacha very, very clearly states that you are not allowed to daven mincha in that room. Since the congregation is already davening Kabbalah Shabbos, you don't bring your gullus to Israel. Don't bring your weekday to Shabbos. So you actually have to step, because you're not davening with a minyan, because you're davening b'yechidus, you're davening alone. So don't do it in the shul. Step outside, go in the hallway, go in the basement, whatever it is, go into a different place, because the Beit Knesset, the shul cannot tolerate this contradiction of a Shabbos davening and a weekday davening happening at the same time. That's the halach in Shulchan Aruch. So Rav Waldenberg was asking is, how does this translate as far as the kotel goes? And it comes down, and I'm not going to go through the whole text with you because it's a lot of Talmudic this and this and this, but what it comes down to is, does the kotel have a din of a Beit Knesset? And he comes to the conclusion that the kotel does not have the din of a Beit Knesset, does not have the status of a Beit Knesset, of a shul, which is why anything goes, which is why, by the way, in my opinion, that I think people should just live and let live. This whole nonsense with the kotel, who wants this, that, everybody should be able to daven how they want. I understand you don't want in your space. If there's a designated space, people could daven how they want. Leave them alone. Like, who are you to decide how everybody else should daven? It's not your shul. It's a public space, granted under the antiquities of the state of Israel, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I get it. But I thought it was a very reasonable, until the government reneged on it and backed down on it. And again, I'm not involved in this. And I'll tell you my Natan Sharansky story about this, is that if they would have had 3 separate areas, men, women, and do whatever you want, Shalom Al Yisrael. And by the way, big rabbis have said this. I spoke to Rav Stav about this at length, and he says, might be like it's a no-brainer. Let it be. Like, why do you care so much about this? Just to make trouble. And it's such a terrible black eye on the Orthodox community, because we all get thrown into that ship of saying, oh, you guys are such, kanoim. It's terrible. It's awful. Like such sinas chinam that takes place for no reason. For what? So I was on a mission with different groups of rabbis from all denominations, and we sat in Natan Sharansky's office when he was still the head of the Sochnut. That building where the Sochnut is, right up the block from the Great Synagogue in Jerusalem, right on the corner. It's a nice building. We sat in this big conference room, all these great pictures. And he's like one of the great heroes of the Jewish people. There's no question about it. And he's like a cute little simple guy with his Russian hat on, and and he's this very thick Russian accent. And I don't know. I mean, I understand why, but for the Reform and conservative rabbis, like this kotel controversy is a huge deal. It like gets under the skin, and they want to they came in there like guns blazing, like they want to let him have it, because he's the head of diaspora affairs. That's what the Israeli agency is supposed to do. And they said, like, what are we going to do about it? What's going to happen? He says in like his perfect broken English, which is just amazing. And he says, I'll be honest with you. He says, Israeli politicians only care about getting reelected. And they only care about people who vote for them. And he goes, and last I checked, you don't vote for them. So they don't care what you think. And he said, you want to make a difference? He says, get involved. Move here and get involved. And that was his answer. I think the amount of jaws that hit the floor at that table was just unbelievable. But the kotel is not a Beit Knesset, says Rav Woldenberg, which answers a lot of things, by the way. And there's which and I'm sure you've experienced this, is that sometimes when you're davening at the kotel, because there's so many things going on, multiple minyan going on at once, it's very hard to concentrate, because you're saying mincha, they're saying maariv, or they're up to a different party. You're trying to say out chazar sashas, and you hear people laning, and you hear baruch, and you hear kaddish, and you don't know what to do. Okay, it's like a stimulation overload. You don't know what to do with yourself. There have been a couple of times, so I've had the privilege of being at the kotel, let's say for Yom Ha'atzmaut or Yom Yerushalayim, and for a public davening where they had 1 minyan on a loudspeaker. Now that was something, that was uplifting. To have thousands of people saying Hallel together on Yom Ha'atzmaut or Yom Yerushalayim in 1 minyan at the kotel, that's something. That's davening. Because there's no confusion, and there you really felt of being part of something great, or even saying slichos, or if you've ever been for Birchas Kohanim, which is a balagan, but to see it, you have to see it once in your lifetime, that on one day of Chol Hamoed, on Pesach and Sukkot, thousands of Kohanim come to Duchen at once. So imagine being blessed together with thousands of people being blessed by hundreds and hundreds of Kohanim. You should see the pictures of it. I keep a picture of it in our sukkah of, like the rows are like 5-6 deep of Kohanim by the wall. Imagine that, right? And they all sang, V'yishmerecha. It's the most beautiful thing you could ever imagine. And when we have that, but all these little things, and together with the problems, the difficulties, the challenges, but also the great successes, this is what we have to appreciate on when it comes to Eretz Yisrael, when it comes to Medinat Yisrael. I think we're long past the times of when we argue about, we used to spend a lot of time in yeshiva fighting. Do you say Hallel? You don't say Hallel? I don't like that. That's not the issue anymore. That's not the question anymore. The question is how do you put the state of Israel and the people of Israel and the land of Israel first and foremost in your thinking and everything that we do in terms of appreciation, in terms of our ability to go there, in terms of how we support, in terms of our outlook. I get it. There's a lot of issues, but it's not gonna, we're not, we're way past like the nitpicking of how do you celebrate Israel? How do you celebrate it? It's not about that. It's that every single one of us has to realize that God gave us this incredible gift. Tzur Yisrael, the Tzayar, God is the fashioner of this beautiful tapestry, of this painting, and it's still not finished. It's still not finished, but we have gotten 73 years plus, but 73 years of the state, 73 years of a glimpse of understanding the beauty of what Israel is. And for that, and for so much more, we have to always be thankful. We should say Hallel every day. But when you have the ability to visit Israel, to live in Israel, to have family in Israel, and whatever it might be, and again, I'm not saying it's easy. It's never easy. And it doesn't come without huge prices. And there's all types of thoughts on all sides of the spectrum. Whatever that may be, our obligation is to appreciate, to understand that God has given us the ultimate gift, that now we're hitting that point. We're probably at that point where the majority of Jews in the world now live in the land of Israel. That is monumental. That's already talking about Mashiach time. That's a big deal. And we're living and we get to see it. And we are seeing it happen, because the future of Jews in the diaspora is highly questionable. Look at the rates of people that are leaving the faith and our birth rates, et cetera, et cetera. You can do all the statistics in the world. There's no question. You look at how they're rising in the state of Israel, again, not without challenges, but that is what we have to appreciate. So on this 73rd anniversary birthday of the state of Israel, I always think that when I had the privilege to be in Israel for the 70th, for the Yom Ha'atzmaut, and it was also the first time that I ever really experienced the Yom HaZikaron going into Yom Ha'atzmaut, which is just like the most bizarre psychological traumatic experience anyone can go through, and even more so for people that really have to observe it because they have loved ones who were lost, and it's like depressing and it's morose and there's nothing on the radio and all they have on TV are just people telling stories of their loved ones who got killed and on and on and on. And then all of a sudden night comes and it's like they coined a term for it in Hebrew. It's called hasvich, because really that's what they came up with. I'm watching on TV and it's like watching a car accident that you can't look away. And I'm watching for hours and hours. I'm crying like a baby, like all these stories, these kids, and and then hasvich. So, we did the whole tekas in Yerushalayim, and then we decided to go, we did the siren. Dafka was like on the Burma Road, like on the highway to hear the siren, because I wanted to be in the middle of the highway when everything stopped so I can get that on film. And we did that, the whole Yom HaZikaron, and then we headed up to Tel Aviv, and there I want to see in Kikar Rabin, and like the policemen are handing out silly string to the kids. And I remember the next day, so we had the air show, and like they have all the different planes are flying over the beach there, and there's like a little 8-year-old kid. He has all the information. He's like, oh, next is coming the Phantom, and next is coming the B-52s. Next, he's telling me every plane that's coming next, which is great. And then I went to eat. I went to eat on the Namal, on the port of Tel Aviv. We're eating at a restaurant, and you see a nice young family, Israeli family, and a mother is feeding her child in a stroller. By the way, in Israel, you could take your children to anything. You could be out at 11 o'clock at night in a fancy restaurant and you could take your kid in a stroller. That's totally fine. That's just one of the many things you have to love about Israel. Okay. I was in a restaurant on Saturday night and I felt like I was on an El Al flight because people just came in indiscriminately and like with children at 11 o'clock at night and like pushing and taking things on their own, whatever. So she's feeding this kid in the stroller and she's just talking to him. And I'm thinking like, I was so jealous and so moved by it. And a simple mom, just talking like a 2-year-old kid. Eize chag hayom. She says, what a holiday it is today. Yesh lanu medina, yesh lanu eretz, yesh lanu tzava. And she's like feeding the child the food, but feeding him like, this is who we are. How lucky we are. She says, today's a day of celebration. I have never once felt that way about July 4th. And that's my fault. And I come from a very patriotic family, but maybe because our country's much older, a lot of reasons, but the connection that we feel is like, you know what? Eize chag hayom. So we have to appreciate the chagginess of Yom Ha'atzmaut, and again realizing all the blessings that we have and our ability. We should never ever chas v'shalom take it for granted. So again, I hope everybody should have a Chag Sameach. Please, if you have not yet, we're having a program on Wednesday night. Please sign up for it. It's together with FIDF, and I know a lot of people in our shul are involved in FIDF, and I think they do really great work, especially with the impact scholarships that they help young men and women who finish the army to go to college and get degrees. But we're doing, again, our Yom HaZikaron going into Yom Ha'atzmaut, so I think that should be a really great program, given our kind of limited ability to do programming. And yes, so please sign up for that, and I think it'll be great. And again, I wish everybody Chag Sameach, good to be back, and everybody should have a wonderful day.
Thank you.